Ahoy landlubbers, it's me, good old Pointy Hat. How's it going, guys? So I was trying to come up with something to talk about for the next Captain's Cabin, because, it's really not fully established yet. So far it's still just sort of been announcement videos, but I kind of want it to be something else. So lately I've actually been watching a lot of nostalgic things, like videos and reviews about games that used to be really important to me growing up. And I figured, why not just talk about some of that stuff, tell you guys why I'm so into the gaming, how I ended up here, in a sense. Even though I'd probably tell you the contrary if we were having a discussion about it, I'm really glad to have grown up when I did. The late 80s and early 90s were a really great period for gaming. I mean, there were just so many, great, quintessential games that were released and created that if they were made today, they'd still be just as great, but people wouldn't appreciate them the same way. And there's something really cool about the fact that every one of your friends knew about Mario too. You'd play Mario, and you'd go into school, and you'd talk to your friends, and everyone would be like, "Oh yeah, I got to this level, I got points, I got fire flowers, whatever." Just the fact that everyone knew about the same games that you did was really cool. And like I said, some of that stuff just doesn't translate the same way nowadays. I mean, don't get me wrong, you can still have discussions with your friends about your favorite games, but the internet has made it different, you can share your experiences with complete strangers, and it's definitely not the same thing. Not to mention the fact that there were some really great creative games that didn't just take hold the same way as something like Mario did. For example, my favorite genre, the point-and-click adventure games, the type of things where you have an inventory of stuff that you rub against other stuff until you make sparks or fire or something. Those games I find to be a lot of fun, but people nowadays would find them really boring. I mean, no matter how entertaining Sam and Max Hit the Road or Day of the Tentacle are, you show them to a 10-year-old nowadays, they're just where are the explosions? How come I can't get a headshot? And yet, even knowing how great a game is, you play it now and it's just different if you didn't grow up with it. Take my friend Tekazurek and I, for example. I never played Majora's Mask growing up, and so far, if you haven't seen it, I haven't been having the best time with that game. But I'm going to power through because I want to learn more about it. And on the other hand, my friend Tech never grew up with video game systems like the NES and Super NES, and as such, he was raised in a barn and didn't understand things like normal, civilized people did. Best friends, love you, Tech. But when he tried to play Super Mario Bros. For the first time with Professor McGonagall, well, he came across a little bit weird just because he was mystified by the game and things that I feel like most people our age would sort of take for granted. And I've actually been doing a lot of thinking about it, and I think I've got some reason why those games in particular can be really nostalgic and emotional for some people and completely idiotic to people who never played them before. Back in the late 80s and the early 90s, gaming graphic technology wasn't exactly impressive. You had pixel art as your characters, both good guys and bad, and for a lot of people I can understand why you wouldn't relate to them. But to me, and I feel like a lot of other people growing up the same way I did, it wasn't so much that it wasn't expressive, it's that it gave you just enough information to tap into your imagination. So it wasn't just what you actually saw when you were playing the game, it's how you interpreted what you saw. You made it bigger because the game itself couldn't provide the full 3D graphics that we have nowadays. And I think on some level that sort of affected the way that I thought about video games growing up. I mean, I've always loved video games. I don't remember the very first game I ever played, but I can't even imagine a time when I didn't know what video games were. They've been with me my entire childhood, and they've been really pivotal in the sort of ways I've seen the world in a weird, quasi-depressing sounding way. But going off of what I was just talking about, making the game bigger using your own imagination, I never really used to think of video games as something that you could beat or complete. I never really thought about how a video game would end. It wasn't until the N64 came out with games like Super Mario 64 and Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time that I ever actually completed any game of significance. Which is why it's probably appropriate that the first game I ever took part in Let's Playing was actually Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. I actually still remember the first time I beat Ocarina of Time. It was right around dinner time, and I remember that I got up to Ganondorf and had no idea what the crap I should be doing. I was freaking out. I was legitimately having a panic attack because I didn't want to get set back and lose all the progress going through the castle and all that stuff. So I called up a friend of mine who was in the middle of dinner at the time, and he and his parents were both sort of displeased with my situation. They didn't really understand my dilemma. But then he got out his like pre-mod strategy guide or whatever, and like gave me some tips for beating Ganondorf. And then when I beat it, it was such a huge deal to me. Like I couldn't even like process it for a while. I mean, for someone who had never completed a video game, to complete a video game on such an epic scale is obviously a huge deal, like a really big deal to me at the time. I mean, especially when you take into account the fact that I've always been terrible at video games. This isn't a front that I put on while Let's Playing or something that's developed recently. I've always been just terrible at video games, but that hasn't stopped me from loving them. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, I had an older brother and an older sister growing up, and the three of us would get sort of like allowances of video game playing time so that we could actually share one video game console. But I remember being the youngest and being so terrible at video games, I always wanted to see more of the video games, but after a while I realized that it was sort of a waste for me to try and spend my allotted time playing through the game, because I would just never get as far as my brother or sister would. So eventually I started to like give them my allowance time so long as I could continue to watch them playing the game. I can't imagine that they were too happy with that. I mean, they're older than me, but at the time they were still kids too, so having their little brother like sitting there and asking them questions about the game must have been really annoying. I'm talking to my brother. I still do this sometimes, and I think he still hates it just as much as he did back then. But yeah, my love for video games prevailed even over my complete inability to make any progress through them. And I think it's because of my fascination with video games that just sort of surpassed all of my frustrations in not being able to successfully play or beat them. And I think a big part of that comes from a sort of early nostalgia about spending time with my family. See, among most of my friends, my family's sort of notorious for being like media-centric. I mean, we had like family movie nights up through when I was a teenager, up until I left for college even. And we used to, when I was very young, some of my earliest memories are watching shows that, like Star Trek The Next Generation, when they first aired. I remember watching some of those episodes and just the bonding that we would have over the shared story experience and talking about the characters and things like that. So I don't know, something about those early experiences, like sharing stories with my family and getting along better than young children probably do under most circumstances. I think something about that stuck with me and sort of merged with the sense I had playing and watching video games with my siblings, and how that experience was greater than ourselves. It was something that we could all take parts in, something that we could share together. The point is that all these things sort of coalesced into my interest in like all things media. I mean, I went to college to write for television because television was so important to me growing up as well. But now in my spare time, I'm making video game videos in order to share my experience of that with you, and I think it's something similar. But even from a very young age, I used to take these little memo sheets. My family had these like this cube full of like tiny sheets of paper that we would use to like leave notes for one another. But I remember that I probably got more use out of those things than anyone else in my family, because I would just steal a big chunk of them and doodle little comic book panel style stories based on stuff I was seeing in TV, like the Power Rangers or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, together with, you know, things from video games. And one in particular really stood out. I'd say that one of my favorite video game characters growing up was Mega Man, which is really kind of interesting considering that I've ever only owned like 2 actual Mega Man games. Mega Man 6, which is widely regarded as the worst of the early Mega Mans, plus Mega Man X, which a lot of people don't like for changing the genre somewhat. And then I had a couple of like handheld ports, which are also really poorly regarded by fans of the series. So to me, at least, I think it's really interesting that that series was so, like, formative almost for me in just like how significant it was to the way I looked at stuff. It was this game series that I only had like what other people would think of as like the worst experiences with, and to me I was just completely mystified from day one. You also have to take into account the fact that I am terrible at Mega Man games. I mean, I talk about being bad at video games, but you've seen that I can complete video games, but Mega Man, I am god-awful at. I mean, to this day I haven't completed a single Mega Man game. Actually, maybe that's something I should try to fix now that I'm making video game videos for the internet. Would you guys be interested in seeing me try to run through the old Mega Man games, the ones I never played and the ones I did play and couldn't beat? I think that might be an interesting series, but I don't know. You guys let me know what you think. Wow, seriously? I never even beat Mega Man X? I spent more time playing Mega Man X than, like, almost any other video game I've ever owned. I'm sure if you looked through my family storage, you would find a bunch of my old drawing pads with a bunch of images that were clearly inspired by Mega Man characters and even, like, the boss level layouts. I mean, I would make up these stories as if they were like TV shows or movies, but somehow it always end in a climactic Mega Man style boss fight. There's just something about Mega Man. I mean, I think it's that it combines the aspects of platforming from a game like Mario with the awesome robotic superpowers that I clearly wanted as a child and still want as an adult. Plus, I mean, just think for a moment about the ramifications of Mega Man. I mean, it's a challenging platformer, just like many games were back on the NES. And you'd have to train repeatedly. You would die over and over, get game overs, and you'd have to start the level all over. But eventually you'd have some sense of how things work, and you can make it to the end of the level where you met a boss character who would, like, immediately kick your butt, because you have, like, one life left over after all the terrible platforming failures you've experienced. And then after you've trained yourself to have some knowledge of how to defeat that robot boss, what are you rewarded with? You get the same superpower that they were just kicking your butt with. What better reward is there than that? So yeah, I mean, I guess at this point I'm really just rambling. I didn't really have a point to begin with. But like I said earlier on, I guess I just wanted to share my experiences to what got me so interested in gaming and why those experiences early on have stuck with me and why I still have such a passion for video games today, even though I still suck just as bad at them. I don't know, hopefully something about the story has been of interest to you. I just sort of wanted to talk about something. And if you want something more coherent to listen to in the future, maybe you could give me some suggestions on what types of things you'd like for me to talk about here in the Captain's Cabin. And in the meantime, you could share with me some of your early experiences with video games. Maybe tell me about your favorite video game character growing up. But he probably can't beat Mega Man in a fight, because Mega Man's the best. And also, he has all of those robot powers. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Hopefully I can bring you another one of these soon with some topic that you actually want to listen to. And I'll see you guys in all the other videos. Well, I won't see you, and you won't really see me until the next Captain's Cabin. But there will be video games!